play. And another foul on board. His third for setting a screen.
Because of physical play, although Jordan Taylor just got caught with a moving screen.
Pick and roll. And a foul. Offensive foul coming up. Ken Valentine standing right there.
Izzo dying for a moving screen.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Moving Screen Podcast. I'm Brendan Quinn of The Athletic, here with Dylan Burkhardt of Hoops. It is Monday morning, March 30th. This should be
Final 4 week.
Should be Final 4 week. It is not. We are instead in our normal home offices. Dylan in Cleveland, just outside Cleveland, I should say, right?
Yep.
And I'm in Ann Arbor. We're just going to talk some hoops today, help everyone pass the time. We got a long list of topics to kind of bounce around from Michigan State to Michigan, some Big Ten stuff. So, Dylan, you holding up all right over there, pal?
Holding up all right. I see you redecorated the home office over there. It's looking sharp.
We did. We moved some things around. Still got some more work to do. We redid the whole living room. We redid the basement and put in a little home gym action to make sure we're taking care of ourselves during this, I don't even know what to call it, period of isolation. So, but happy and healthy, thankfully, and we hope everyone out there is as well and taking care of yourselves and all that good stuff. Dylan, Hoops is still going strong. Give a pitch to the people to make sure they're still subscribing and hanging in with you.
We are this week. Well, really, this next couple of weeks, we're going to be doing deep dives into Michigan's 2020 recruits, doing 20 thoughts on each 2020 prospect.
I thought the Terrence Williams one was excellent, Dylan.
Thank you. Started with Terrence Williams last week. We're going to have Isaiah Todd this week, but basically been breaking down a bunch of film of each prospect and then kind of just figuring out how they would fit, what their game means, looks like in the Big Ten, stuff like that. So we've talked about that 2020 class quite a bit, but taking time to dive deep into each individual and see what to expect.
And maybe once you finish these guys, we can we'll have one whole podcast just dedicated to going through all the newcomers.
Yeah, let's do it. We got nothing but time.
There you go. Over at The Athletic, first of all, there's currently a 90-day free trial available for everyone to help you get through the time, and also check out the site, and you can read archive stuff you can read. There's still an unbelievable amount of content coming out on a daily basis. Most recently, from yours truly, there's been a story on Juwan Howard's first year at Michigan. He and I spoke at length. He was obviously by phone from Miami, but we just kind of talked about this year and, what lessons Juwan Howard of May 2019 would have loved to have known between then and March 2020. So we got into some of that stuff, some interesting stuff from Juwan. Also, I've done my thoughts on both the Michigan roster and the Michigan State roster in terms of their scholarship players for next year. And then also on a more personal thing, early last week, I wrote a piece on the best NCAA tournament game I ever covered, and that was the 2009 Villanova-Pitt game when I was still but a young pup reporter. And tomorrow have actually a kind of something of a similar vein. We've been doing a whole series on this day in NCAA tournament history, since there is no tournament to cover. We've been going and finding the best game on every date and writing some pieces on that. My date was March 31, 1997. Arizona, Kentucky in one of the great national championship games ever. So I've been talking to people for that, and that story's running tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to it. So check that out. But for now, we'll talk some hoops, Dylan.
Let's do it.
All right. We're going to start with Michigan State. The big news last week, obviously, Xavier Tillman declaring for the draft. No surprise here on either side of this. Think it will be an interesting process, but as I've said on like every frigging radio interview I was on last week to talk about it, like, the immediate thing turns to, okay, will he stay or will he come back or will he go or what's he going to do and da-da-da. And I'm like, look, man, if you're already freaking out over these questions, like you need to take a deep breath because this is going to take a while before there's any actual clarity on what anyone is actually doing long-term decisions, right? Like, I think Isaiah Livers is going to declare for the draft as well, sooner rather than later. Maybe other guys, maybe a Franz Wagner just throws his name in just to go see. But in terms of actually getting a definitive answer on stay or go, that ain't coming anytime soon. Do you agree?
Yeah, and we don't know if the deadlines, like the established deadlines, are even going to hold because they're all based on the combine and stuff like that. So it's unclear. And you have to remember, these decisions are all coming way earlier than they would to begin with. So forget about the uncertainty. Michigan and Michigan State have been making these original NBA draft decisions more in mid-April in the past, right? Just because the seasons end later.
Right.
So
both could conceivably be playing right now still. So
yeah, and in recent years, you would have never had a March NBA decision from Xavier Tillman to declare for the draft. So that adds time, and then figuring out what on earth is going to happen with the schedule. I don't think anything has been officially changed or announced or decided, right? So that's just uncertain right now. So I do think it'll be a while, and we don't know what kind of feedback is even going to be available to these guys compared to the normal process.
Yeah, there's from guys that I've talked to kind of around the league and stuff, they like league scouting departments are just trying to adjust as they can, and it's going, really film heavy, just stuff that they wouldn't otherwise be doing, especially this time of year when teams would be playing games and stuff like that. You've got so many people in NBA teams who are just sitting around with nothing to do, like advanced scouts. What the hell do you do if you're an advanced scout in the NBA right now? There's going to be a lot more film study right now, especially with the lack of one-on-one workouts, that there might not be any one-on-one workouts for all we know. And the thing when it comes to Tillman specifically, I do feel like that's an advantage for him, that the more film you watch on Tillman, I think the more stuff you like, and the closer you watch him, the more you like him, in an odd way, should be beneficial.
Yeah, and I think one of the big concerns on the NBA side is it's not really that you're not going to see guys go one-on-one for an hour in your gym or work out against cones or shoot some jumpers in the combine. It's that you're not going to have valid measurements for a lot of guys, and you're not going to have valid medicals for a lot of guys. So
good point. That
is a big reason why they come into the facility, and that's why the combine exists, to get a really even measurement and even picture of, okay, we can say this guy is this wingspan or this guy is this height. You're not going to have that. The agents can tell you something, but you're not going to have a concrete basis, and that does play a big part in a lot of these decisions.
I wonder at what point they have to almost go to video with those things, to distribute widely, right? Someone literally doing the measurements on video and sending them out. Like, that's something that's going to have to happen at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think agents are going to have to drive the process, right? I think if you're like, look at Isaiah Livers, he's hamstring, whatever else is going on with, like, in normal circumstance, he would go to work out for the Utah Jazz, and they would have a doctor look at him and decide what they think, or any injury like that. Now it's going to be maybe you go to your doctor, he writes something up, and your agent passes it to teams or just refuses to share it, right? Like, you're going to have a lot of guys shutting things down, not really sharing information. It's going to be a weird draft year in that case. I don't really think that affects Xavier Tillman directly. I mean, I don't know that he would measure particularly well. I would think that would probably be a negative for him. But if you're just watching Xavier Tillman film and you're watching other guys film, you're going to start to like Xavier Tillman a lot more. Go ahead.
No, please, sir.
I was going to say, what do you think, like, from what you've been hearing, where do you think he kind of stands as far as his grade right now, would you think, like, going into the process?
I get the sense that a lot of teams are still trying to introduce themselves to him and get a better feel for who he is, what position he could be, what he projects to, what he can guard. And that's the thing, with film, you're going to see him switching. You're going to see him doing all these things that will probably be pretty eye-opening to people who don't know him. I get the sense that, he is certainly a draft draftable prospect in most teams' eyes. The bigger question that I have is how many teams are willing to promise him a guaranteed contract, right? Because the conversation about first round, second round is kind of dated at this point. It's more a team says, I don't, if we even if we take you 45, we're going to give you a guaranteed, 2-year deal. You're looking at this, you're looking at that, an option for this year, whatever it may be. Is one team willing to promise that? Or will 7 teams promise that? Because if, once you get up to that kind of area where you have a bunch of teams promising you a guaranteed deal, then you go, right? That's just what makes sense. The good thing I think for Xavier Tillman's decision is that there's no wrong decision to make. And I usually lean toward a guy should go, right? Unless it's no chance of being, or no chance of earning at least a 2-way deal. But for Tillman, if he comes back, I do actually think that he can improve his value. And I don't feel that all the time for a lot of guys. Like, what are you going to do differently? I do feel like Xavier Tillman can actually show more stuff, and it would maybe benefit him to be seen a little bit more or show some more on offense. I don't think it's out of the question that he could be a top 20 pick if he does come back next year. At the same time, if he goes, his skill set and what he is as a player, I don't think there's any way that he does not get a contract next year, even if he's undrafted, which I don't foresee happening.
Yeah, it feels like to me, if you look at the situation now, his ceiling's probably that late last 10 picks of the first round, right? Like that's where he'd be shooting at as coming out this year. I can see it both ways for the situation coming back. I don't think he's ever going to be like a top 15 pick. So at that case, how much upside is there really? At the same time, on the court, he could certainly be like an All-American type player, right? His college impact is through the roof as a senior. I guess the big question would be, if he were to come back, I think he would probably shoot upward of 100 threes next year. He'd shoot more threes, right? Because that's going to be what they're going to tell you. You're 6'8", you're kind of this tweener between the 4 and the 5. If you can shoot threes, all of a sudden you're a way more appealing prospect. At the same time, if he shoots 25% on those attempts, it's almost like there's less shooting upside because now you've seen it at that level. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I think that is the thing to weigh. I don't know that the NBA cares that much if you're an All-American and have this amazing season,
right? As
much as they care about just the upside of the situation, right? So that's kind of the hard thing to weigh as far as the stay or go decision for him, because he could have a better season, which is impressive to say when he was first team All Big Ten,
right?
Or should have been. So it's a tricky spot. I also think he would be hurt by workouts in the sense that I feel like he could probably just go and shoot well in an open gym situation, and all of a sudden people would start to believe in his shooting a little more. That's sort of the swing skill for him, right? Like, he can defend multiple positions. He's a great rebounder. He's not a great post-up scorer, but he's a great finisher. If he could just shoot threes, all of a sudden he's a slam dunk prospect, in my opinion, right?
Right. And
that's probably the thing keeping him between that 20 to 30 or 30 to 45 range.
Yeah, and you also have to look at, okay, what does Michigan State look like with him next year, right? Like what spots is he being put in to show various things? And it would be very different than this year because of Hauser, right? You have a completely different look. You take away the, all-time assist leader in the Big Ten, and now suddenly you're playing through, you don't know who the point guard is going to be. And they're going to play through Hauser a lot in the high post. And I think it could be beneficial to Tillman, but you still have to kind of see it. Their spacing is going to be a lot different because previously you didn't really have to guard the 4 against Michigan State, right? You could throw all of your attention on Tillman, and it's not going to be the case next year. What does that look like? I don't know, but these are things that kind of have to fall into the equation, right?
Yeah, you also have to account for the fact that previously you were worried about Cassius Winston.
No doubt.
Probably 3 of your 5 defenders at any one time. So you have to weigh the upside and downside of that. I think Tillman would have probably the biggest impact or improvement he would show is with his passing next year. I think he would kind of be almost a playmaker as a big, which would it's a more unique skill, right? There's a lot of 6'8" dudes who can shoot. There's not a lot of 6'8" guys who can facilitate and playmaking in the way that I think he'd be capable of, especially in an offense like Michigan State's where you're going to rack up assists.
Yes. Yeah, and no one even talks about the fact that he had 3 assists a game last year.
They should.
Yeah, I know. He was like top 20 in the Big Ten in assists in league play, which is just crazy. So you mentioned, so you feel comfortable saying his range is basically probably 20 to 45?
That's what it feels like to me. I'm not an NBA draft expert by any means. I also think he makes a lot of late first round picks are good teams who need good role players, right?
He makes a lot of sense.
He makes a lot of. If I had a good team, I'd want Xavier Tillman. If I had a crappy team, it's probably a waste. Whatever. What are we going to do with Xavier Tillman? But a good team, he can make the difference, right? And that is something I would look at as far as those teams also seem like they will sometimes promise a guy, right? That's really what you're looking for in this process is if someone drafting in that 20 to 30 range is like, yeah, if you're there, we're going to take you. And then you just go all in, right? I can't see him. What do you think his upside is coming back as a senior? Do you think he can be a lottery pick just based on his production? Or is he always somewhat limited by the fact that he's a 6'8", 4'5" tweener?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would, like I said, I think it would do him well to be a focus of attention, and he would go into next year being a preseason All-American. He wouldn't be second fiddle to Cassius Winston. But at the same time, more spotlight means, if you do have any errors or any flaws, they will only be magnified. So, right now, everything around Xavier Tillman is positive. Sometimes, though, the more you stick around, the more, there can be holes poked at. But I feel about him overall as a player that very few of those holes actually exist. Look, if he's still going to be a 26% three-point shooter, he's not going to go out and take 115 threes. He's just not going to do it because it's losing basketball, and that's just the way that he plays. As a point of reference for anyone wondering, he took 50 last year. He went 13 for 50 for the year. I do think there's a lot more he can show. I think being the focal point of an offense as a scorer would increase his value. I think sometimes NBA scouts are maybe given a little bit too much credit for seeing what a guy like Tillman does, whereas people like us who watch them every game think it's abundantly obvious. There were still guys I was talking to late in the year who thought I was crazy for even mentioning him as a draft pick. So I don't know if we are very much in a bubble of Xavier Tillman appreciation that does not exist elsewhere. I can tell you, I feel like among media and fans who pay close attention, I feel like the general thought is that he stays in the draft. And then I feel like in coaching circles, maybe even Michigan State circles, the feeling is that he'll stay. That's my read on things just based on conversations. Yes.
I think it comes down to this. I don't see a lot of downside for him coming back.
Right.
As far as I still think he'll be probably in about the same spot. And the fact that there was no NCAA tournament this year, he could come back and be sort of that. Yeah,
that's got to leave
a legend
void.
On campus,
totally,
right?
Totally.
That graduate, those are all things that matter, and those are the things that just make more sense to come back. And I think that's more what would weigh into the decision to stay and go. It's not you're going to play yourself into a top 15 pick. It's you'll be an All-American. You'll have your NCAA tournament. You'll go out how you want on your own terms and still be a first-round pick. And that's the decision he'll have to make.
And obviously weighing on that decision is the fact that he currently has a wife and 2 children, and they're living in probably a 600-square-foot apartment on a college campus.
That also weighs into the decision.
Or he could go make $2 million, $3 million next year, change his life. That money's probably there regardless. It's a matter of when, not if. But it's a big ask to say, wouldn't it be great to go be a legend on campus? Yeah, it would be great. It would also be great to have $2 million and, be able to start saving for your children and all this stuff. There are way bigger things on the table. But I do think you make an interesting point of, the lack of an NCAA tournament, how does that actually weigh into the decisions of guys who are in between things? Personally, I don't think it should, because that's something that's out of your control. I don't think you should plan for things that are out of your control, right? Like, I know that it's out of your control where you get drafted, but the NCAA tournament, like, okay, well, what if the pieces around Xavier Tillman stink next year and you don't make the NCAA tournament? They don't have a point guard. What if so-and-so, what if Aaron Henry just doesn't take a step forward? What if this guy, what if Rocket Watts just has a very mediocre sophomore year? Well, suddenly now you're Xavier Tillman and you're on this team and it's, okay, I banked everything on this. I don't.
Yeah, that's the downside.
Yeah, it's a downside.
That's like what, Nigel Hayes almost? Like,
yeah, exactly.
You come back and then you're on a not as good team and get this reputation of, well, you can't carry the team. That's the downside.
Right. Like, they are losing Cassius Winston. It is not improbable for this team. Like, I really like Michigan State on paper for next year, right? But it's at the same time, it's not improbable for it to be the end of November and us sitting there scratching our heads being like, why didn't we think that they were going to stink because they lost Cassius Winston and this is just a totally different team, right? Like,
to be fair,
totally plausible.
We have that conversation around that time every year.
Well, it's a good point.
Ends up working out all right. So maybe that's on us.
Then they go and win the Big Ten, right? So, interesting.
So you talked. Go ahead.
I was just going to say interesting stuff all around, but go ahead.
So you talked to Tom Izzo about kind of the roster, and you wrote your thoughts on the different pieces. So right now, beyond the Tillman decision, Michigan State has a potential scholarship open, correct?
They do, yes.
And then Joshua Langford's status is also kind of up in there.
Joshua Langford's status is up in the air. I don't think it's out of the question that Aaron Henry test the draft waters. There's still a decision coming there. I reached out and had some contact. Hold on. Had some contact with his camp, we'll call it. And it was very much in the decision-making phase of things. So anyone who thinks that that's just a moot point, I don't think that would be accurate. So that's something to certainly watch for there. But yeah, I mean, Langford has a decision to make. I reached out to his side of things, haven't got a firm answer back on that. So that seems to be up in the air as well. There's a lot of moving pieces, but regardless of all of those moving pieces, Michigan State is 100% pursuing a point guard for next year. And they think one way or another, whether it's a name that we know right now or not, that they will get somebody somewhere along the way. So in terms of those targets, I guess, what do you think should be really the focus? Like, do you think it should be more of a scorer, more of a facilitator? Do you think it doesn't matter? You should just get the best available player. Like, what does the roster need most if you're going to add one player at this point? In a perfect world, my opinion would be a distributor who can shoot. Right, who's at least a threat for spacing reasons, for other reasons, because you're losing one of the best three-point shooters in the league, right? No, again, people don't really talk about it. Cassius Winston shot 50% on threes in league play last year. So you're losing that, and a guy who obviously operated out of ball screens, did all these things. He was he pushed him in transition. You need someone who is reliable enough to put the ball in his hands. It's one of the reasons, there's a lot of attention on Bryce Aiken right now, right? And we're going to talk about him. I find it interesting. I haven't watched enough Harvard basketball to know how good of a true point guard he is. The scoring numbers are obvious, right? The dude gets buckets, and it would be a great piece to have. I'm not saying I would take Bryce Aiken in a heartbeat. I'm just interested what he would look like because I think he's a score-first point guard on paper, but he was also at Harvard. So, yeah, what was around? I know he had Seth Towns around him, but he's a guy who you go score the ball, right? But he also wasn't on a trash team. They have players there. Yeah, well, I think over 4 years or 3 years, Seth Towns and Aiken played together a dozen games. Mm-hmm. I think they were both injured at different times and sort of just had their own times leading the team. So
that was not necessarily, I don't know if you can say, oh, well, he had this dude who's going to Ohio State next to him all the time.
Right.
That was kind of a mix and match situation.
Good point.
There's a lot of stats floating around on Twitter and whatever else about up grad transfers and how they've kind of struggled in the past. I go back and forth on that, especially with a guy like Aiken, who was a top 100 recruit coming out of high school and has some of that ability and has been touted to have that ability before he was a sexy grad transfer that everyone just like, oh, let's get this guy because he's out there. Yeah. So that I think he would be of the names on. So the names on the list that I came up with, you might know other names to go on here, but Kareem Mane, is it Mane? Maine? Do you know how?
I've been saying Maine, but I just made that up, and this is on brand, so let's just roll with it.
All right. So he's a Canadian, I think borderline 5-star kid who Michigan State is in heavy with. Marquette is in heavy with, I believe. He's more of a 6'5" lead guard, but combo guard a bit, right? Like he's more of that big combo guard is how I would put it. And has he visited Michigan State?
No. They have visited him a number of times, both Izzo and assistants.
Okay. And then Bryce Aiken from Harvard. He's a small grad transfer, scoring guard, ridiculous shooting range. See, you say scoring. Go ahead.
The thing that just leaps off the page to me about Aiken is, and I don't have the specifics in front of me, but his last full year was his junior year, and that was when he averaged 22 or something. But his 3-point shooting was about 40%, I think like 2.5 makes per game. But even more, the one that I love is was averaging 7.5 free throw attempts per game, shooting like 89%. Just a guy who can put the ball in the basket, is hyper aggressive, I think. You don't think of him as a scoring guard?
I do. I was going to say,
okay.
So the first thing I really like about him is he doesn't just make threes, he makes deep threes.
Yeah.
Like he can shoot from 5-6 feet behind the line easily and makes those shots. Second, scoring point guards are sort of what Michigan State does, right? Like
True.
Michigan State is at its best when it has scoring point guards. Drew Neitzel, Cassius Winston, those guys were all
Denzel.
They play off the ball, on the ball. Like I think that system really favors a guard like that who can shoot and can do some other things. So I'm intrigued by the fit with Aiken. I think he would make. I mean, Michigan's recruiting him too. I think he'd make Michigan or Michigan State a way better team. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, the other two are interesting, though.
The other two names, Amari Hardy, notable. I mean, he was solid at UNLV. I think he's more notable because his brother is one of the best guards in the 2021 class. So potentially
and he's
lasting impact there.
Detroit kid, right?
He is a Detroit kid, yeah. Yep. They moved to Vegas, but originally from Detroit.
Right. And
then Carleek Jones, probably one of the top transfers out there at this point, kind of a do-it-all guard. He's from the Big South, so that's where I start to worry, though.
Yeah, that's a huge drop.
Because you look at Christian Keeling, North Carolina, came up from the Big South, really struggled until the last 5 to 10 games of the year. Jihad Proctor at Purdue was an all Big South player, struggled to really make an impact for a while. Jones is better than both of them as far as his production at that level, but we have seen guys struggle coming up. But he checks all the boxes, can score at every level, play out of ball screens, do everything you'd want. I think he's a little bigger too, so
40% 3-point shooter.
Yeah, I mean, he's good. It's just, what does that look like? And that's my question with him as a up transfer.
Yeah, and the other thing with him is he started almost 90 games in his college career. Like, he's not one of these guys. He's a 3-year Division I basketball player with a ton of experience. I think Radford's had a decent amount of success.
Shared the title this year.
Yeah. Yeah, but I agree with your premise, though, that it's really hard to... Yeah, so they finished second, first, and first in his 3 years in the Big South. So a lot of games, a lot of wins, a lot of success, a heady guy. So...
But to put it in perspective, the Big South was the 30th ranked conference in college basketball out of 32. The Ivy was 16th. So that's a big difference. Like
I find it hard I find it hard to even like watch, without having a coach's eye. You can pull him up on Synergy and watch him, and yeah, it looks great. And at the same time, it's so hard to be able to really gauge what it means, right? But at the same time, for Michigan State specifically in this conversation, like having an experienced guy, like at least this isn't a situation where you necessarily it's someone that you have to be able to bring in, give him the ball, and you're playing 35 minutes a night. Would you love for that to be a scenario to have someone that good? Sure, but like Rocket is going to play some one and blah blah blah. Like it is a situation where it's really attractive for someone who wants heavy minutes, but you're not devoid of any other options, right? Does that make sense?
I think you'd look at it like it might look like a spot where someone could come in and be the starting one, but in all likelihood, coming from that level, it's going to be the third guard, so to speak, right?
Yes.
Give you that quality, those minutes, but you're not going to be counting on him to carry the offense.
Right. Whereas like Michigan, if you're one of these guys, if you're Jones or Hardy or Aiken, just on paper, and I'm sure what they'll be told by other schools is, I don't think Michigan is that attractive because there are currently bodies there. There's Eli Brooks, there's David DeJulius. Michigan State, though, I feel like one of these guys, their eyes might get real wide. You see this talent, and you say, I can go walk in there and be their starting one from day one.
Yeah, I still see them as more similar situations. Obviously, they haven't like completely played out as far as what the roster is going to look like. Michigan's roster is still unsettled with different decisions in both directions. But, I mean, you're talking about two of the highest usage point guards on good teams in the country graduating, right? Xavier Simpson and Cassius Winston are both going to leave a huge void that's not going to be filled by Rocket Watts and Eli Brooks.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and there's no there's no starting point guard on either. Foster Loyer or David DeJulius is not a slam dunk starter on either roster, if you ask me. Right? Like, if you're coming in, that's like, okay, it's an open competition.
Okay. I
you
still
disagree?
I still feel like for a guy like Jones, a guy like Hardy, if I'm looking at that roster and I see Eli Brooks there, I see his minutes, I'm assuming he's playing the one this year. You have to realize these guys are not following Michigan basketball the way that we are. I feel like the void on paper, and especially from afar, the void at Michigan State looks different than the void at Michigan, in my opinion.
Yeah,
and
I
think the Michigan staff feels that way as well in terms of their selling of the idea of bringing someone in.
Yeah, I think right now that's definitely the case.
Mm-hmm. So, but I also feel like there's a far less chance Michigan actually does bring someone in than there is Michigan State.
That's fair. Who of that list, who do you think would be the best fit at Michigan State? Or is there another name we need to add? Also, I'm not.
I would probably say Aiken. He's probably the best player.
Yeah,
I think he just gives you the most potentially.
It's hard because all of them could be 1-year players. Even like Mane or Maine, however we want to say it. He's looking to be. I'm going to say Mane just because of Sadio Mane. So he's looking to be a one and done, right? So you could look at all 4 names as 1-year rentals, and it's hard to weigh. Do you get more out of an experienced guy who's maybe been injury prone but knows how to get through a college basketball season, or do you look for someone who more wants to make his mark right away? It's a tough balancing act, right?
Right. And what's so interesting in this whole deal is, you're having a recruiting process without having a recruiting process. You're not able to bring guys in to visit, right? It's all being done over phone and Skyping and FaceTiming and all this stuff. There's no campus tours. It's just really just a different world that everyone's operating in. And, part of the question is, of these guys, who's looking to just make a decision right now, right? And who is more, like I've been told, the Canadian kid, like he wants to be able to visit campuses and actually get a feel for where he might be going and stuff like that. These grad transfers, if I'm Amari Hardy, look, what best opportunity? I'm a grad transfer, right? I want the best opportunity, and I want a grad program that, is something that fits me well, right? And whatever that is, let's go and try to win, right? And put your best self forward. So it's a really different situation for each guy, and whoever wants to make decisions soon, that's going to weigh in on things.
Yeah, I also think there's different types of grad transfers as far as, does it make sense to go to maybe a school a couple of steps down that still has a good chance to make the NCAA tournament, where maybe you have a little more freedom? Like if you're going to go transfer, Carlik Jones is from the Cincinnati area.
Yeah.
If you're going to go to like Cincinnati, you might have a lot better opportunity to showcase yourself compared to playing in a system where there's guys who are legitimate pros in the system who are going to be featured more. So you have to weigh that a lot also, right? Like going to play for Michigan State is not the easiest decision to make. Especially if you just want to get buckets.
And I'd be really interested to see Tom Izzo handle especially a grad transfer point guard, where it's such a matter of trust with things with him, and there is very much a process, it seems like, for him to develop guys and kind of get them to buy into his way of doing things and all that. Well, this is suddenly a very abbreviated situation. There might not even be a summer where normally guys would be coming in early and trying to get adjusted and acquainted to things. Like, there's a good chance you're getting to campus in September, whatever it might be. And it's hand the ball, let's go play some basketball. Like, just a bizarre situation in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, the whole offseason is going to be interesting.
Right. And let's touch on Langford on this, because of all the guys who this whole scenario creates a unique situation for, Langford has to be high on that list. I feel like in another universe, in my guess of how this would play out would be that, Langford would go through graduation, not come back to Michigan State for a fifth year, and go do individual workouts, try to get a team to get him a spot for summer league, right? And then go try to prove that he can play via summer league, and then try to catch on a two-way contract, right? And you just little by little work your way up. There's probably not going to be an NBA Summer League now. I don't know in what way Josh Langford's going to be able to showcase himself in any way for professional value, given that it's just going to kind of be rapid fire, right? This offseason is going to be this abbreviated, rapid fire, fill roster spots, and just get, proceed somehow to the next season. From like the 2020 to 2021 transition is going to be bizarro world and really easy to get lost in the shuffle for anyone. Him being basically a perfect example.
Yeah, I mean, there's still going to be two-way contracts to be given out.
Sure.
Josh
a lot of guys who
hasn't played basketball competitively since when, right? It's been a year and a half or whatever, a long time. He needs reps, and it's the worst time ever to have no reps available to get. I also, what would your read be on just going to play somewhere? Like, there's places you can go and just start your career versus coming back to Michigan State for a sixth year. Like, that's a lot to ask. And I talked about this, I think, even talking about seniors getting a fifth year. That might sound great when the season ends, but no one's going to that's a lot to go through and say we're going to go back to school, go to class, do all this stuff, right? Like, you also could try to just be a pro. Where do you think he falls as far as that decision? I mean, there's a chance that it does make sense for him to get those reps, but it's also asking a lot, and I don't know.
Right. And what about the scenario of he comes back for a 5th year, they still add a point guard. They add Bryce Aiken, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bryce Aiken's going to play a lot as your starting one. Are they going to start Langford over Rocket Watts? I don't think so. There's a chance if he decides to come back and they still make a roster addition, well, it's not, and yes, in a perfect scenario, for Langford's point of view, right? A perfect scenario in coming back would be you come back, Rocket's the 1, you get to play at the 2, you are the wise old Al teaching Rocket Watts how to play basketball, and you're while shooting 42% on threes and playing good defense and showing that you have some pro value. That's the perfect world. I don't know if that exists, though.
Yeah, if Langford is healthy, he's playing the 2 over Aiken at the 1. You go Watts, Langford, Henry, Hauser, Tillman.
Wait, say that again? You think Aiken would not be starting?
We just said that if anyone would come in, they'd be like a third guard.
Oh, no, I don't think so. I think if they would be bringing in a point guard in order to play Rocket at the 2, because they don't.
Yeah, for times. You think Aiken would start over Langford if they're both healthy? You might actually.
Well, yeah,
the season
once
with
a point
healthy
guard.
minutes. But you don't think Watts will be thought of as a point guard even if you add Aiken to the mix?
I think if they have any excuse to keep him at the 2, they're going to keep him at the 2.
I don't know if that. I don't know that. I like the idea of him being able to play both.
Sure.
And having Aiken as the guy who can come in, right? Like I don't know. That's an interesting dilemma. It's interesting because we just said that we were talking about the grad transfer coming in as a third guard, and now you're just penciling him in as a starter.
I didn't say him as his third guard.
Okay. It'll be like Langford's health could make sense also. Just you don't want to play him too many minutes or whatnot. Like it's so much uncertainty. But at the same time, Aiken's health, you got to worry about that.
Yeah.
He has not been healthy for a whole season for a while.
That's a good point. So, all right. Let's slide over to Michigan. We're already 42 minutes into this. Let's slide over to Michigan. I want to start with Livers.
All right.
I do think his draft decision's probably coming, and from all points of contact that I've had, I imagine him testing the waters. What do you see as his kind of same thing with Tillman, right? What's the value of staying? What's the value of going?
So my thing with Isaiah Livers' decision is I think he has probably the most downside or risk to coming back. I think it's hard to draw up a situation where he has better opportunities within the offense next year compared to last year. He's going to go from playing with a pass-first point guard who creates him great catch-and-shoot opportunities to having a lot of guys at his position, having not a reliable passer to get him great looks. I think there's downside in that regard, right? Isaiah Todd's going to play minutes. Where is he going to play those minutes? Franz Wagner is going to play minutes. All these guys, Joshua Christopher, if he comes, he's going to take shots. He's not going to pass the ball as much as Xavier Simpson did, as much as he is a good passer. There's a chance that Livers doesn't look as appealing in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Not because of his ability or anything else, but just because of how much different the offense might look and the opportunities that he gets. There's also a chance that playing in a completely different style of offense actually makes him look better. We don't know, but there is downside in the uncertainty, right? Mm-hmm. Like you knew exactly what role Isaiah Livers was going to play this last year because we'd seen it before. We knew exactly how Xavier Simpson played, and we knew how well they played off of each other. So that's where I start with Livers' decision.
Yeah, I would start on the pro side of things, and it goes back to my base question when it comes to all these guys, the kind of tweener guys in terms of where you actually fall in the draft. Like, I just don't know how many teams, like, how many teams are going to him and saying, we're definitely taking you at this spot and we're giving you a guaranteed contract. I just don't know how much that exists. I think him going in the draft will be far more for feedback than for the reality of staying in. My guess.
Yeah. So at the same time, I don't see him. He's not really on any draft board top 60s or anything like that. He's not a particularly draftable prospect, right? Like I could see a team liking his shooting and size and taking him somewhere in the second round. I don't think he's getting a first round promise or anything like that. Like he's a level below that. I just think that the roster situation does have to add to some of sort of the uncertainty and has to play into his decision at least a little bit.
I think that's a great point.
I don't know. It's hard though. Like you just don't know how the Michigan's roster is going to play out because there's just so many moving pieces. And at the same time, he could be a senior. And I mean, if he shoots 45% from three for a year and keeps taking more shots and figures out how to use more possessions, like he's very capable of having a better season. This year was kind of a lost year with the injury. But if you look back at how good he was in November, the potential's there. And I think he's really hurt by not playing in the postseason, especially if he was able to just keep getting healthy and hit 5-10 threes in NCAA tournament games. All of a sudden, he might be talked about differently.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the interesting thing about Livers is I feel like last year, for as good as he was at times, he was still only scratching the surface of how good he could be. I think he was just scratching the surface on creating off the dribble, being a distributor, being a guy who can actually make decisions with the ball. He's a 90 whatever percent. He's like a 95% free throw shooter. He only took 2 free throws a game. Like he could be so much better. There's like a peacock outside my window or something, or a turkey. What the hell is that? Sorry.
Things going crazy out there.
That was not expected. I don't know if someone maybe Otis slipped some acid in my coffee. That was unexpected.
Here's the problem, though.
Yeah.
If you're just scratching the surface of all those things and you're going into your senior year, at what point do you start questioning if you can get past the surface?
Well, but here's the thing. The 2 years that we're talking about, which were, supposed to be big developmental steps, they were playing with a point guard who had the ball in his hands 85% of the time. Like, there was really very little reason to ask Isaiah Livers to do any of that stuff, no? He was more valuable as a standstill shooter.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I feel like he had opportunities more this year, and he showed flashes, but also still struggled. I think I don't see him growing into a guy who you're going to play through on the wing and is going to be racking up assists. And he's a scorer at heart, right?
Sure. But even showing more variety in his scoring in that, I think.
I mean, there's potential upside. I just think how you weigh that compared to a guy like Franz Wagner, who I think that's an example of a guy just scratching the surface, right? Like you look at Franz and he's still learning how to play. There's so much uncaptured upside. Whereas I think Isaiah Livers has to make big strides to reach that. I think a lot of it is already just like right there for Franz Wagner to go and grab, right?
Right.
So that's, I don't know. And age it's not real appealing to be going into the NBA as a senior, right? You rarely have a guy who comes back for his senior year and then all of a sudden is a top 20 pick, unless they're like All-American type of year, to be completely honest. So I don't know. The injury makes it complicated. The roster fit, I just keep going back to Michigan has so many players at the 3-4 combo spot. I think you'd have to worry a little bit about getting lost in the shuffle. Not like you're not going to play, but you're not going to get more shots. Maybe you don't know that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. There is going to, especially if he's back, the crunch in that wing 4 area is going to be legitimate. Like a guy like Brandon Johns kind of sitting there saying, I think there's a chance Brandon Johns could take a major step forward and be, force Isaiah Todd to have to play behind him. I also think there's a chance Isaiah Todd comes in and hurdles over Johns, and suddenly, okay, what do you do if you're Brandon Johns, right? Because you're not going to play the 3. They can go a little bit small ball 5, but I don't know how much. That's going to be so matchup dependent.
The obvious release for the crunch at the 4 is that there's not really any proven options at the 5. So if that's your pressure release is, well, there's going to be minutes at the 5 to be played.
And Todd is not playing the 5 at all.
People are going to play the 5. I mean,
Brandon, if it's anyone, if it's anyone outside of your centers, it's Johns.
I mean, I think there's Isaiah Todd, Isaiah Livers, right? Put those guys at the 5, right? Like, you're going to have to play small. I don't know if the other option is just Austin Davis or Hunter Dickinson. If you have a pick and pop
Colin
5,
Castleton.
you're going to have to play someone else. Colin Castleton. Yeah. So, but either way, it's harder to release. Guys are 4s for a reason, right? Because they're not 3s. So it's harder to push them down to the 3 than it is to push them up to the 5 if you're trying to figure out how to get more of your talented combo forwards on the court.
Right. And there is still the overall roster crunch, which will just be a conversation until it isn't a conversation. I don't, even if Livers does declare for the draft, which I think he will, I think he ultimately is back next year, would be my guess. With Franz, I'm not sure if he tests. I've gotten the sense that he is pretty much on board with playing here next year. I have not heard anything otherwise been given any indication that anything's happening there. So obviously things can change. He's in DC right now with Mo and their mother. Their father's back in Germany. But otherwise, there are still guys that have to make conversations. And one of the really interesting parts of this whole scenario with everyone having to scatter and be isolated is that some really important one-on-one conversations that would be had with maybe a parent comes in and you have a meeting with the coach, and it's not necessarily you getting run off, but it is a, very much look at each other in the eyes and say, hey, here's the situation. If you want to stay, you stay, but you're not going to play. You're behind these guys. This is the situation, blah, blah, blah. This is when guys make the decisions to move on. Those conversations, I mean, I guess they could happen over video, but in a normal offseason, this gets done pretty quickly, and that's not happening right now. So, when I talked to Juwan about it and asked specifically about that, I want to have these conversations in person. I'm like, well, good luck, bro. Unless you're taking the chopper to people's houses, I don't know how that's going to happen in a lot of ways.
There's a reason that Zoom stock is up at $150 right now. So I think that, we skipped over Franz a bit. Mm-hmm. So I think with Franz, the fact that Mo went through the process, decided to return to school, had a great year, and then got drafted, probably doesn't. He would be like one of the last people you'd expect to force the issue, so to speak, I'd say, just based on that situation. As far as the rest of the roster, I feel like there's one big piece kind of overhanging the entire situation, which is what Joshua Christopher decides to do and when he announces it. Michigan's offense, backcourt, everything will look entirely different if you pencil him into the roster versus not, right? So but it's hard to...
On Franz, Franz is the one dude on the lineup who has zero concerns about minutes or role. No one will impact what he is.
I meant that in respect to the transfers and the other conversations you're talking about. Sorry, I jumped back and forth.
Okay.
I think that once that happens or doesn't happen, whatever happens, then you look at everyone's roles. It'll be a lot harder to picture what everyone's role will be on the roster. Because look, Joshua Christopher is starting next year wherever he goes. Mm-hmm. That means someone isn't starting there's a spot that's probably not open. If you look at it that way. So I think that domino kind of has to fall before you can have some of those tougher conversations. Do you agree?
I do, very much so. And when is this decision coming?
We don't know.
No idea.
No,
He had a date, right? And
mid-April, I think, was his original date. And then he tweeted that the coronavirus was killing all the excitement. And to be fair, it would suck to be we talk about how much it sucks to miss the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
These kids play their whole life to make the McDonald's game, the Jordan game, to get to play in all those games. I mean, it's not a small thing. So I think that it seems originally his plan was to announce after all those games, right? So you can go through that circuit. That's a pretty big measuring stick. It's also a big opportunity for guys to play their way onto the overseas radar when everyone talks about going to play in Australia or whatever else, because there's scouts at those games. That's one of the big points where you're evaluating those practices against other top flight kids. That's all off the radar now, so that is a lot more difficult. But we don't know when. He tweeted 4 commitment graphics in a row on Wednesday and then tweeted that he was just playing. And the next time he tweets about his school, he'll be committing. So that's the situation right now.
We'll see about that. Do you still feel like Michigan is in the driver's seat?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to think otherwise. I do think you look at, if any, I mean, there is an international pandemic that could make you somewhat less likely to decide to go halfway across the country to college, right? Supposedly that played a big impact in Cliff Omoruyi committing to Rutgers instead of Arizona State.
Right.
So, I mean, who knows what would happen? There's been twists and turns in his recruitment, but all signs have pointed to Michigan being the team in front. So it's just whenever it's announced. I mean, it's just kind of a waiting game.
Right. Yeah, it's really hard to find out what's going to happen with Michigan until that shoe drops. But as I reported, I heard from Adrian Nunez's mother last week saying, he'll be back at Michigan. It's true blue, blah, blah, blah. Haven't heard back from other potential guys. But we'll see. But like I said, it's the same thing with kind of the draft decision. It's March 30th. And just because it's the off season and our realities, this timeline has all been pushed for something that's going to take forever to actually play out. The timeline of expectation is even earlier than it should be, if that makes sense, right? And those two things don't exactly add up.
Yeah, I mean, every time, because even if you're going to transfer, you can't visit a campus until we don't know when, at least mid-April, but I can't imagine that date's really going to hold. No one's traveling anywhere in the world.
I think at some point the coaching carousel will spin like it normally would have. And like that, when is that going to happen? It's going to happen. I think. Yeah, I think so. I think it'll, because the NBA at some point, whether they're finished their season or not, there will be movement in the NBA ranks. And when there's movement in the NBA ranks, say one guy gets plucked out of college, well, now that creates the domino effect in college, and suddenly you get guys moving, and then guys start transferring, and it's a free-for-all all over again.
Yeah, I just don't know when you consider there's pretty big budget impacts in terms of NCAA tournament payouts to the schools. I don't think anyone's going to be eager to make a big change in the middle of this. So it would have to be, what's it going to be in like September? And then it's too late, right? Like it would have to be in August.
Some places did. Shout out Western Michigan. That weren't well.
Well, yeah, then you're stuck in that situation, right? So that's like, it's a tough decision to say, well, maybe we'll just run this back, because who's going to want to start a new job when you can't meet your kids? It's just a real mess to try to make that change. And right now we have no idea when that'll be over, whether it'll be a number of months, right?
Yes.
So
yes,
that's what we're looking at right now.
Yes.
At the same time, why would you want to transfer, right? Like, You can't go anywhere.
Right.
You feel home somewhere. It's not really like the best environment to transfer unless you were dead set on transferring all along.
Yeah, but that's not stopping anyone.
It is not. The transfer portal rages on.
As of 10 a.m. Monday morning, there are 5 people in there today. So there you go. No one's from Michigan or Michigan State, though. So, all right. You want to wrap it on that?
Yeah, I feel like we've been going for a minute here.
Yeah, that's a nice tight hour of hoops for the people. So hope this was a welcome distraction. Make sure, folks, that you check out my other podcast with Nick over on The Athletic. It's called The Beat. It is on iTunes. We have some special guests coming up this week and some stuff that I think a lot of you will very much enjoy. I don't want to say anything because I don't want anything to fall through or jinxed, but some good stuff coming this week and next week on the basketball side of things, where if there can't be an NCAA tournament, we will still find a way to enjoy our games. So subscribe to The Athletic, subscribe to UM Hoops, leave us a review if you'd be so kind on iTunes, and make sure you support your local restaurants at this time. So that'll do it.